China and the U.S. are spiraling deeper into a trade war. This morning, China retaliated against recent American tariffs by announcing more tariffs of their own, to which U.S. President Donald Trump threatened more retaliation. And just last hour, he delivered. The CBC's Steve Niles joins us from Toronto for the latest. Hey, Steve. So what has the president done?
A retaliation to the retaliation. Stay with me for a second. This is going to get a little bit complicated, and there's a lot of numbers, but I'll try to get through this as quickly as I can. So, Trump taking to Twitter just 1 hour ago saying the following. Starting on October 1st, the $250 billion of goods and products from China currently being taxed at 25% will be taxed at 30%. Additionally, the remaining $300 billion of goods and products from China that was being taxed from September 1st at 10% will be now taxed at 15%. So forgive me for a lot of numbers there, but the headline is that tariffs that the U.S. imposes on Chinese goods are coming out. That going up, that only coming out 1 hour ago. Trump this morning as well, also very active on social media, talking about China, and these were the tweets that got a lot of attention this morning. He tweeted the following: "We don't need China and frankly would be better off without them." President taking it even further in another tweet. "Our great American companies are hereby ordered to immediately start looking for an alternative to China." And it was that statement that really spooked markets. The stock market tanked and only got worse as the day went on. Now, it's not exactly clear what policy measures, if any, Trump can put in place that prevent American companies from doing business with China, but it did not matter to investors. The stock market really took it on the chin after that. That's what happened in the United States today. Then there's what happened in China today. And I mentioned this was a retaliation on a retaliation. The Chinese did their own retaliation. They announced it this morning. They talked about a 5% tariff on $75 billion worth of goods. Now, these two countries, the United States and China, are Canada's largest trading partners. They are also the two largest economies in the world. So as they really go back and forth on this trade war, a lot of concern that it could have a spillover effect here in Canada. Vashi?
Yeah, and there's just overall concern about the potential for a recession. On that issue, the president isn't just blaming China, he's also pointing his finger somewhere else.
Someone named Jerome Powell was the target of Trump's ire earlier today. Jay Powell, he calls him. He's the chair of the Federal Reserve. He has been a target of late, today being no different. Now, some context to this. Stock markets opened lower this morning on this tariff news from China, which was the first thing that we saw today. It was a relatively small loss. Another thing to point out is that Jerome Powell was giving a speech today. It was a scheduled speech. He was at the Jackson Hole Conference in Wyoming, and he was going to talk about something. 3,100 words on inflation, the history of inflation going back to the 1930s. Fairly mundane stuff, but what investors look for in these speeches is kind of what goes at the beginning and particularly what goes at the end of these speeches, because he takes all this historical stuff and he puts it into context. What Powell said was that the economy of the United States is looking fairly good today. And that's what investors really keyed on this morning, because he said, yes, the tariffs are hurting, but everything's fine. That wasn't good enough, though, for Donald Trump, because then he tweeted the following: "As usual, the Fed did nothing. It's incredible that they can speak without knowing or asking what I am doing, which will be announced shortly." He went on, "My only question is, who is our bigger enemy, Jay Powell or Chairman Xi, the leader of China?" So it's interesting to point out the stock market finishing the day severely negative. When Powell's speech was released this morning, stock market was positive, and it was truly Trump's tweets that got things going lower today. Another interesting point that I want to mention, Vashi, the timing of these tweets that Trump announced on the tariffs on Chinese goods, 5 o'clock exactly. The stock market closes at 4 o'clock. The futures market closes at 5 o'clock. This tweet coming out at exactly 5 o'clock. So maybe someone got in his ear and said, please stop tweeting when the stock markets are going, because we saw how incredibly volatile it was today. On the point of whether these countries need each other or not, Donald Trump said, no, we don't need China. There's $636 billion worth of trade between these two countries every single year. They absolutely need each other when it comes to trade. The world economy needs these people, these two countries, to be in good shape with each other. We've heard some major American corporations talking about tariffs of late. Caterpillar, it's an industrial giant. They say it's costing them $300 million a year because of tariffs. So something to watch for on Trump's Twitter account in the coming days.
It sure is, and we will all be watching. Thanks so much, Steve, the CBC's Steve Niles with that update. So, is the U.S. and China trade war escalating to a dangerous point, and how could their trade spat potentially affect Canadians and the Canadian economy? Brett House is the Deputy Chief Economist at Scotiabank Economics. He's in our Toronto studio. Adam Taylor is the President of Export Action Global and a former Senior Advisor to a Conservative Minister of Trade. He joins us from Halifax. Hi to both of you.
Good evening. Good afternoon.
Brett, I'm going to start with you. Let's start with China's announcement of those retaliatory tariffs. We'll get into the reaction in a second, but what can you tell us about the potential economic impact of those tariffs?
Well, the immediate impact is not terribly large. It's covering $75 billion of U.S. exports to China, focused principally in two tranches on agricultural goods, American vehicles, and optical instruments and other electronic goods. But the real problem with the tariffs for the global economy is the continued and mounting uncertainty that they represent for business. Business can adapt to changes in the rules, but when the rules are changing daily, erratically, and with little rationale underpinning them, it's very hard for business to make investment decisions and purchasing decisions.
Adam, has that uncertainty been felt here in Canada?
Oh yeah, we've felt uncertainty almost since the Trump administration came to office, with immediately saying NAFTA was going to be renegotiated, steel and aluminum tariffs, and on and on and on. Now we're experiencing continued persistence of a trade war that will touch Canada, because tariffs that get introduced and then counter tariffs and then new tariffs and new counter tariffs will disrupt supply chains, and as Brett just said, businesses and investors want stability and predictability, and right now they have neither.
Brett, I find it really difficult to try and follow along where the sort of dispute between the U.S. and China is headed. One day I'm reading in the paper that the talks are going well, that perhaps a deal is on the horizon. Then all of a sudden you wake up this morning and these tariffs are announced, and the president starts saying to American companies, start looking elsewhere, don't do business with China. Tell me what your read is on the progression of these talks, and if there is anything to look towards.
Well, I think, as the earlier segment pointed out, this month has seen a major escalation and a really steep change in the tenor of these talks, because at the beginning of the month, President Trump promised or threatened to impose tariffs on the remaining $300 billion of U.S. imports from China that hadn't already been hit by special tariffs by his administration. And that was a real step change, because a substantial portion of those goods are consumer goods like toys, games, sports gear, shoes, electronic goods like computers and phones, the very things that we've thought all along Trump wouldn't dare touch, because his voting base and average consumers throughout the United States would see the impact on prices they pay in Walmart every day. And that is a real negative for any president that's trying to get a second term. So what we've seen this month is a real shift from what seemed like a battle that was simmering, as Jay Powell said a few weeks ago, and maybe not going on to a more intense level, that has completely blown into a bigger conflagration. So
what's the strategy there, Adam, do you think?
I think there is no strategy, and that's the scary part. I mean, at the end of the day, a year ago, the U.S. economy was booming, and that economy was lifting all boats in the global economy, and Canada was doing quite well. But today, we have no idea what's going to come next. I mean, the new NAFTA still isn't ratified. The Trump administration, Donald Trump sold himself as the author of the art of the deal, and he can't even do a deal with his two closest neighbors, Canada and Mexico. So we have a real problem. We don't know where the next tweet is going to come from and what the implications will be for business around the world, and that's a terrible way to be doing business. And with a global recession potentially now crashing upon the shores of Europe, and then now trickling into North America, it's a scary time.
Brett, I'd love to get your read on the potential for that recession, because because we have been talking about that sort of in a different way in the past few weeks than we had prior. Some key economic indicators had a lot of people speculating that one could be on the horizon. What's your read on that, and what about the potential implications for this country and Canadians here?
Well, I want to echo some of those comments. There is only one reason we're talking about a Trump recession possibly being on the horizon, and that is the uncertainty bred by this erratic and quixotic trade battle. When we look at the underlying fundamental data in Canada and the United States, both are reasonably robust economies, where in the United States we've got households that have the best financial situation they've had in about 40 years. We've got a strong labor market, increasing wage gains, and improvements in the housing sector in the U.S. and strong performance from the manufacturing sector. Similarly, in Canada, we have some of the biggest unfilled order books that we've had in 4 or 5 years, and we've got labor markets that have been on a tear, although households are far more indebted. In neither case, in neither domestic economy are there the conditions for a recession. And if you look at most forecasters, although we've all been bringing down our growth forecasts in response to the uncertainties bred by the Trump White House, no one has yet really firmly committed in their forecast to a recession on the horizon. But the kind of crazy trade policy moves that we're seeing today, the kind of erratic tweeting that has just mounted and mounted, is starting to weigh on businesses. And you will see, I think, more and more people putting stronger probabilities on a recession ahead in the coming year.
It's funny that you bring up those tweets, because our producer just flagged for me that just minutes ago, President Trump put out a new one now, actually announcing more counter tariffs following the decision from China. I'll just read a bit of it, Adam, and get your reaction. Starting on October 1st, the $250 billion of goods and products from China currently being taxed at 25% will now be taxed at 30%. Additionally, the remaining $300 billion of goods and products from China that was being taxed from September 1st at 10% will now be taxed at 15%. So once again, we've got, the morning announcement from China, Trump making some very pointed statements about American businesses not dealing with China, and now a third set of tweets announcing additional tariffs, and we've got further escalation in this trade war.
It just goes to show you how silly this trade war now is, where we're putting tariffs and then counter tariffs and then new tariffs and new counter tariffs, and nobody is winning from it. Businesses aren't winning, consumers aren't winning. Businesses will pass the tariffs on to consumers, and so this just shows the fallacy of a trade war. I'm reminded of The Economist the cover of The Economist magazine a few months ago showed the leader of China and President Trump each shooting themselves in the foot with the caption "trade war," and that's exactly what this is. And it's disruptive to business, it destroys supply chains, and it erodes confidence, and then people just don't know where they can count on for a stable market anymore. And that's the real worry for an export-oriented, an export-dependent economy like Canada's, is where do we go next? The U.S. is our main trading partner, China is our second main trading partner, so we're really, really caught in a potential collateral damage situation here as this war intensifies.
Yeah, I think, Brett, a lot of people sort of watching this bouncing ball and trying to figure out where they're supposed to look ahead. Final word to you.
Well, I think the thing that we anticipate now is that this is a chronic condition that's going to persist and probably intensify through the end of this first term of the Trump presidency. And I think it's going to continue in part because the Chinese are playing a very effective game with the U.S. president. They know that he is going to respond to any retaliation that they put into place, and they also know that the most toxic thing for a president to try to win a second term is a downturn in the economy and a downturn in markets. And the action President Trump is taking are leading to exactly those two things. So if Beijing wanted to get Trump out of office, they are playing him in precisely the way they need to do to bring about that result.
All right, I have to leave it there, but thanks very much to both of you this evening for your time. Thanks to Brett House and Adam Taylor. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. Thanks for watching.